Hello and welcome back to episode 12 of the Boxing Social podcast in association with Betfred, with me, your host Rob Tebbutt, and my able co-host, the former WBO super-featherweight champion of the world, Barry Jones. Just as we did with episode 11, I'd just like to remind everybody that we are both COVID negative after taking our COVID test today, and we are socially distanced. So today's COVID show will continue as normal. Barry, we've already done our introductions. It is very much the same day. Let's talk about some boxing. We have some British boxing coming back soon. So we are just over a week away from Josh Warrington, the now ex-IBF featherweight champion of the world, against Mauricio Lara, who I'm not too familiar with. You're more of a boxing brain than me, so I don't know if you've watched him.
I've seen him. He ain't bad, actually. And you know, I think his style will gel well with Josh's. Not for him, won't bode well for him, but he'll gel well for Josh. He'll come forward and he likes to lead with the uppercut, things like that. So there'll be some shots where might work for Josh because he has quite a shell-like defence. Hands are nice and high, elbows tucked in tight. But there might be a gap through the middle. But and people always say there's levels to this game and all that, but this would be the case in point where there's just need to be a level or two below Josh. As long as Josh is motivated and ready to go, because being a world champion, which he no longer is, but that was by his choice, but still being that sort of level and expecting big fights, then to box someone like Lara after a long time out might be... there's two sides of the coin here. One is a little bit disappointing that he's not in a big fight. He'll feel uninspired, but also happy to get maybe a warm-up before he does step in against a more quality of opposition. So as long as he's focused and motivated, then he'll walk right through Lara. It'll be a few rounds, but it'll be entertaining, but I still think he gets a stoppage.
Right, let's talk about that, because as I mentioned, he is now the ex-IBF featherweight champion. Are you a fan of fighters vacating titles, champions vacating titles?
No, I'm not at all, because it's so hard to get it, and it should mean more for you. And I think it did mean a lot to Josh, because he did incredibly hard to win it, and the first defence were as hard as you could like for anyone to get a title. Like obviously Leigh Selby and Carl Frampton. But I think he's done the right thing to get rid of it. If he's not willing to defend against his number one challenger, rather than just drag them on further out of their careers, then get rid of it, let them fight for it. Hit number one, number two. That's fair enough. I understand why he doesn't want to box Galahad. He's already beat him, though it was a close fight. But it wasn't a good fight to watch, and he doesn't want to go all around. He wants to go further on. But again, it's still a problem with the sport where Josh Warrington is not a superstar in world boxing. He's a star over here, and everyone knows. And he might be the premier featherweight in the world, but he's not a superstar as such. But yet, he's still bigger than the title, because the titles doesn't mean as much as he used to, because there's more of them, they're easier to obtain. It wasn't easy for him, but in generalising the whole sport, and that's the problem. Where and also being feather mandatory again, I sort of confused myself, but Galahad deserves his chance again. Of course, he's worked his way back up there with a good win, but it's not a fight we want, but it's a fight he should fight to keep the title. But if he won so many titles, he'd have to fight him. Couldn't defend or move up. I don't know. Getting rid of your titles it's a bit disappointing. And also, where's the big fight? He's a big fight. He's a fighter who needs to be in big fights. No, he's had the arena. He's filled that arena every time. He had that big fight against Frampton, which is a great fight, one of the best fights, domestic fights there's been. To be honest, it was fantastic. And he's filled the stadium. So, or half fill the stadium in Ellen Road in Leeds. So he needs to be in big fights, that big occasion. You haven't got the crowd, so he's big fight, big names. He's been talking about big names before around him. He's in a division where there's a couple of good names there, and he's boxing Mauricio Lara. So it's disappointing.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of his pulling power, and that's one of the reasons why we've not seen Josh Warrington box in a while. The fact that COVID has come on and taken away crowds, which is such a massive factor for somebody like Josh Warrington, who brings that Leeds audience along with him. Not having that as a potential carrot to dangle in front of a Gary Russell or a Kanzu, whatever happens with that fight, we could still see that fight, to bring them over and say, okay, well, you're going to have to travel, but you've got 30,000 Leeds fans, or 20,000 Leeds fans who are going to be paying, and there's obviously more money there, then that's, something that he's not got now to potentially get those big fights. But going back to what you said about the IBF mandatory situation, so I think it's very important, particularly in say modern boxing, but in the recent modern boxing, is the mandatory position is something that's kind of being abused now more and more regularly than it ever has been. Now, boxing is a lawless sport, as we all know, and there is a huge lack of structure in a lot of areas in the sport. And one of the few things that boxing still has is a mandatory challenger and is a ranking system. It's one of the few, there's no league table in boxing that you can look at like you can in football and other sports. It's one of the few things, despite what you think of rankings, I'm very aware of, ranking titles and beating certain fighters and paying certain sanctioning fees will always give you a bit of a leg up in the ratings. But when it comes to the mandatory position, I mean, we've seen the WBA create regular belts, interim belts, super belts, gold belts. The WBC have got franchise champions whereby if you're a big name in boxing, you don't really fancy boxing, you're mandatory, just apply to be franchise champion. You don't have to. Brilliant. Yeah. But one thing I will say, now, I'm personally, as a boxing fan, never really in favour of fighters vacating titles, but I would much rather Josh Warrington vacate his title if he doesn't want to box Kid Galahad as his mandatory than have this kind of franchisey, interim-y, regular nonsense. Yeah. It is, despite what you think about it, it is an example of the sport kind of working.
Well, this interim thing was a good idea when it first came out, because it wasn't a good idea, because that should just have been another eliminator. Well, you wait to box for the champion, the title, but it was if the champion can't fight due to injury or other unforeseen circumstances, then he didn't deserve to lose his title, to be stripped of his title. So they would have an interim title fight to keep those top two contenders busy, and they fight. They're the interim champion, and if the champion gets fit and well, then you fight him for his title, and if he doesn't, then you become the genuine champion. You get crowned a champion, not in the ring. They happened to Alex Arthur. Devin Haney sort of had that as well. So they've won the title. They didn't actually beat the champion, and they didn't win the title in the ring, but they did sort of. They beat the next available top challenger, and then but now they have an interim title champions boxing the same night as the regular champion.
You see like people like interim defending an interim belt.
That's right. Yeah, how many belts can you have? And does it bring more money to the sport? I can't see it. I think it just dilutes everything in many ways, but. Yeah, in that way. But systems are good. It's how you get to number one sometimes the problem. You can manipulate the system by boxing for their international titles against journeymen and getting the top 10 in the world. And that's an issue there. But yeah, Josh Warrington back to Josh Warrington. That was the real focus. He is a guy who is, his ability in the ring is matched by his support outside. And so he's a big player for that. And I think that's it. And that's obviously his pulling power financially as well. Because I imagine the crowd, the gate there probably goes a lot of way to helping with his wages. But so he's been probably a bigger victim than most in the pandemic, certainly in the UK. But it's good to see him back. He's a good fighter. And again, he's a guy who needs to be sort of busy. I think he's that sort of fighter. I don't think he'll go off the rails, but the way he fights, I think, the way he fights, he's so committed. And every time he boxes that, I don't think he's going to have a massively long career. He doesn't take damage, but I think the way he fights, I don't think his career is going to be really long. But so he needs to capitalise now.
And he has been busy, and you mentioned there kind of his style as well. He's an all-action style. Yeah. And, this is now his longest period of time out of the ring, and he's also boxing, a less than stellar opponent on the back of boxing Sofiane Takouche, who is also a less than stellar opponent in his last fight. So it's a difficult one for Josh really here to see, unless he has a big fight lined up afterwards. I think it's going to be difficult. I can't see Al Heyman. We've seen Kid Galahad is apparently signed with PBC or is going that way with PBC. If he wins the vacant title, I think they're going to make that Jazza Dickens fight for the vacant IBF title. Yeah. If he wins that, then he can go and unify with a Gary Russell. The Kanzu fight can still be made for him. It's a difficult one because you're kind of going to be reliant on Gary Russell or, in that case, Al Heyman, offering Josh Warrington, who's now a recently deposed or recently vacated champion, a route back in, and by association offering Eddie Hearn a route back into the featherweight landscape when you don't really need to. So I think it very much is a risk. Going back to what we were saying about the mandatory situation, I think it's not very helpful that depending on the situation, depending on the fighter, depending on what fight we really want to see, I feel like the mandatory position is kind of viewed differently by fans and promoters and fighters depending on who's in the mandatory and who's the champion and what fights. And I think that is just as unhelpful as anything, because you have a promoter that in one vein, the mandatory, we must have our mandatory challenger, we must have our mandatory shot, and in the other vein, he's got a champion who doesn't want to box a mandatory, and now you're applying for franchise this and other routes and potentially going for unifications and keeping mandatories at arm's length. So I think, as I say, I think recently the kind of the mandatory position has become less and less powerful in the sport.
It has, yeah, because and also when say Joshua Fury, for instance, say that fight would happen tomorrow, they got a rematch clause. How can that be allowed? Because they have mandatory challenges waiting on you to fight.
Exactly the same as Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. They signed. Admittedly, we didn't get the third fight, or we haven't yet.
Dillian White missed his opportunity.
Sure, but the mandatory was the mandatory, all being well, would have been ordered after that, but they would have still had a third fight to go into. So how would that have worked out? You know, you're making, and I think personally, you know, from my experiences with you know, certain governing bodies and my experiences with the presidents of certain governing bodies, I feel like it comes from a place of wanting to keep everybody happy all the time and trying to keep everybody on side. And all you do then is the lightweight division, we come way off point as we always do, the lightweight division at the minute with the WBC is an absolute car crash. And it's stuff that's happened over 2 or 3 years of poor decisions of trying to make everybody happy, instead of just going, actually, if I have to upset Devin Haney, or if I have to upset George Linares, or if I have to upset whoever, but to keep some sort of structure, then the longevity in the sport will, you know, it's better for the long-term prospects of the sport.
Yeah, but you think about that. I always say I love the sport more than the boxers in it. No, obviously I follow the boxers in it, but the sport itself, because boxers come and go. Like your favorite football team, you support the players when they're playing there, but then they could be playing for your rivals the next season. So you follow your club, and for me, I follow my sport. I follow boxing, and I have my favorite fighters, of course. But I follow who I like to watch. But it's the sport I watch, because then another one will come along who's just as good, if not better, and I'll want to watch him all the time until he retires, and so on and so forth. But yeah, the WBC with the lightweight is weird, because it's like Lomachenko was the champion. I was sure of that, and then he was franchise champion, and then Teofimo Lopez beats him. So does he become? You can't lose the franchise championship, I don't think, because it's given to you, one. That
was initially how it was. Initially, you couldn't lose.
And then Devin Haney wins. Did he win eliminate?
But this little segment there is kind of indicative of the issue with the WBC, because this is a problem that's been going on with the WBC since Mikey Garcia had the lightweight title. When he went to move up and box Errol Spence, was never coming back to 135 pounds in a million years. Luke Campbell was actually the one who was next in line for that, and ended up having to wait. And then they ordered a box off, and then the box off didn't happen. And then Lomachenko came to box at a vacant belt. And then it's all just a mess. And I feel like whatever you think of the IBF, and we've seen some dreadful mandatory challenges over the years from not just the IBF, not digging them out exclusively, but we have seen some terrible ones from them over the years. Say what you want about them. If you're a champion and you get ordered to box your mandatory, you have two options. You can fight him or you can vacate, which is what I think, whether you like it or not, should be the way across all of the sport.
So obviously the Galahad thing is a commercial decision. That's what it is, because it's not for Sky, which I guess it'll go on. It's not a fan friendly fight to watch. So the first one wasn't. The second one might be. But the first, if you go by the first one, it wasn't the greatest of watches. And how much do they, without the crowd, how much do they get paid for it? That's probably what they say. Obviously, you're saying to Warrington, who's getting X amount. Well, you're not going to get that now because we haven't got no crowds. But you still got that really horrible, style like Galahad, and he might beat you potentially. Now you could do a better job on him, but he might beat you this time. And like some people thought you won the first one, and it was and you couldn't argue with that. I don't think so. Let's move on to the thing. But now, again, it's a risk. It's a risk, like you said, it's a risk, because like if Navarrete wants to box Gary Russell Jr., I can't see that happening, but. They'll go separate routes, because ESPN and Bob want to go one route and BBC go the other route. And again, Galahad could be the one who, or Jazza Dickens could be the ones who benefit more than Warrington. That would be a pity. But I think Warrington can move up in weight.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me to see him move up in weight. But again, to fight who? And considering that you've just been champion at 126 pounds, he had established himself. Whether it's him or Gary Russell, I think would probably be the two guys that you would pick as the one and the two of the division. he'd kind of established himself at 126 pounds, went over to Eddie Hearn, and then, you know, before he's even boxed with Matchroom in his second spell with Matchroom, he's now titleless. So it is a risk.
Actually, if you put it down, if you just put it on paper, it sounds awful.
Yeah, it doesn't sound great at all, and particularly when you have a domestic mandatory looming, because it's not like, you know, Galahad, we've seen him talking about it. We've seen him kind of shouting from the rooftops that Warrington's ducking him and Warrington's avoiding him. And as you say, if you just look at the facts of what's happened, it doesn't look great. I know Eddie has spoken quite openly about, again, the political kind of minefield that is boxing. And you've got Leo Santa Cruz, who holds the WBA super featherweight title, the super version of the featherweight title. He's, of course, at 130 pounds, just got stopped by Gervonta Davis, so he's not apparently going to box back at 126 pounds again. But Kanzu, who held the WBA regular title, the IBF wouldn't sanction Warrington versus Kanzu as a unification because Kanzu didn't hold the super title, which is why he then had to box Galahad as his mandatory or vacate. So in Eddie's opinion, and it's an opinion that's shared by several other people that I've seen, Al Heyman is holding on to that WBA super title for the fun of it, just to stop that fight, just to stop the unification. And that's, again, it's
you've lost me.
Again, yeah, that's the thing. It's the chess. It's the chess game of boxing outside the ring.
I don't know what to say. I stopped listening this week. I've stopped listening. It's because all we do is slag the sport off, because I love it. I'd be so frustrated because things like this, like I can't understand. I can't make a head or tail of it, and I watch boxing, and I'm in boxing, and you're working on a day-to-day. So how do you sell that to people who are just armchair fans or like to watch a bit of boxing now and again? Am I watching a world title fight here? Well, technically, maybe. Let me just check my book.
And that's the thing, man.
Boxing bollocks.
You've mentioned it today, and it's something that you've mentioned in the past. That's when you dilute the sport, because as a pure casual fan, one thing that you can recognise is a champion. And you know, Thomas Hauser, who's a big friend of Boxing Social, we speak to him fairly regularly. He said, you know, if every 4 years when the World Cup was on, you had a winner of the World Cup, but then you had a regular winner and an interim winner and a super winner of the World Cup, you got 4 world champions. You couldn't have 4 winners of the Premier League every year. Like, and it makes it too easy for non-boxing fans to be confused.
I suppose in many ways that's their version of when the Champions League first came out. It's because the European Cup was like the best team in every league in the world in Europe, but you get the winner of that league. No, you had the top 4 or something.
Top 5 in some instances.
There you go. So top 5. And then I understand because they're some of the best teams in certain leagues, but that's how it used to be. But obviously, commercially, it's better off having all those teams playing regularly and more teams, more money playing, and I understand that. But if I think boxing don't quite work that way, it might work that way for the sanctioning bodies. So I think all these people trying to keep promoters happy, they're trying to keep fighters happy, and I think so. There's too many promoters and there's too many sanctioning bodies, and there's not enough in it for me. that's literally like that's every boxing person, isn't it? There's too much over there, too much over here. There's none of it for me. That's what it is. But even Warrington and Lara, I forgot his name then. Warrington and Lara, it'll be a decent little fight to watch. But there's only one winner. And
look, regardless of what's happened with the IBF situation, and you know, as you say, it sounds like we're slagging the sport off, which I don't know if we are or not. But it's kind of trying to make head or tail of things. And look, Kanzu versus Josh Warrington is a brilliant fight, you know. And I understand the kind of calls from people that say, you know, a belt doesn't need to be on the line for that fight. It's a great fight. It's okay, yeah, great, but it's a dangerous precedent to set across all divisions when you start saying, okay, belts don't matter. Because, you know, you, for example, when you were boxing when you were starting out.
Oh, don't start on me. Don't start with me.
But belts matter.
But belts matter because there was 2. And one too many, possibly. The reason there's more belts is because, the reason they had to get more belts, I would guess, is because someone got a monopoly on one belt. For one weight, the heavyweight division is usually the one that's the most important one, and then people can get looking. So there was good fighters, and mainly back many moons ago, it would be some good black fighters who couldn't get an opportunity because the colour of their skin, they couldn't sell tickets, or you had a really boring style and you wouldn't ticket, but then you got the good looking Italian American from the Bronx. Could sell loads of tickets, and he was a good fighter. He won the best in the world, but you get the opportunity for a guy who's from Slovakia. And just chucking countries out there who can't sell the tickets. You know what I mean? Just for example, there's no slight on any country at all.
No,
they're all beautiful countries.
We know it was
that I haven't been to. but Evo, that's understandable. So then they go, well, we're going to bypass him, and if you were good but couldn't sell tickets, then you would be left on the shelf for too long. Then another title comes up, gives you more opportunities. Then the same thing happens, then another one comes up. And I don't think it was quite like that. It was just people with money. That's what I used to think it was like, to give boxers more opportunities because they were being harshly treated, but it wasn't. It was just for promoters and other people to earn more money from. And boxers, listen, boxers have benefited from it as well. It's not. I'm a world champion. I benefited from it. If it was like it should have been, I wouldn't have gone nowhere near a world title. Nowhere near it. I mean, not even on the same like islands as a world title. So I benefited from it, and many of others like me have as well. So, no, I'd retire like and slag it off. I don't mean to be like that. But if you love the sport, like we already mentioned, like I really do, then you want it to be at its purest form. And that is maybe is to get rid of all the titles. Imagine if Joshua and Fury if this fight were to happen now in May, June, July, August next year, whatever it is, but whatever, and they just went all this thing with the mandatories and all that, and they went, we don't want your belts. And they go, no, you don't have to pay a sanctioning fee. We don't want them. We don't want your belts. I'm not saying that's a good thing. We don't want them. We just box with number one, number two. Clearly number one, number two. There's no arguments here. And that's how it goes. It trickles down to the divisions then. Because then there's no, I can't fight you because I got a mandatory, and I can't fight you because I got a mandatory and on mine as well. And it's just, okay, no mandatories. But then it's promotional TV companies. What are they all of a sudden?
I was going to say, that can only work to a certain level of fighter. That can only work once you're a certain name and you bring a certain acclaim, or you have a certain appeal, or you're matched with somebody that there is a clamour for. Like, would you care if Errol Spence boxed Terence Crawford for no belts? Obviously not. You just want to see the fight. But, could you get away with two middle of the line, with all due respect?
But also, before Spence and Crawford fight, you're going on saying I'm the best in the world, and there's a guy going, I'm the best in the world. And then it's a narrative then, rather than like, well, I got the title here, so I am the best in the world until you beat me. Do you know what I mean? Not that they both, but then you get the same thing when they both got titles. So I'll just constantly contradict myself. But that's what the sport does to you. You try and think, do you clean it up?
Well, I mean, how do you clean up boxing? I think we've veered off subject enough for
anyway,
for
one
that.
of them, Lara's a good fight. It was a good fight. It's Barrett versus Martinez.
Yes,
Zelfa Barrett versus
yes.
Kiko Martinez.
Let's move on. Zelfa Barrett versus Kiko Martinez. Again, somebody who's very well known on these shores for various fights over the years. Kiko.
And good memories.
Yes, very much so. Former IBF featherweight champion himself, of course. Remember he knocked out Johnny Romero, I think, in two rounds once. So it was very early in that fight. Always a handful, Kiko, and he's still kind of going along and trundling along in his late 30s now, I believe. Kiko.
See, when you first see it, when you first look at it, you go,
oh, he's 34. He's 34. I thought, with respect, I thought Kiko was slightly older than that.
But when you look at it, you go, oh, it's a really dangerous fight for Barrett. Really dangerous fight for him, and maybe he's not quite ready for it. But I think it's good matchmaking. I do. I just think, as good as Kiko's been, and as dangerous as he is, one thing he haven't had is fast feet. And at 34, forget about his age, 34, he's an old 34.
Yeah,
a long hard career.
The fights he's been
and he can punch, and he's physically strong, so he will always be dangerous, and he could just go out there and he could knock Barrett out in the first round or the 8th round. I would have said from 1 to 12. I don't think that he would have that in his tank anymore. But he's a naturally smaller guy against a big super feather, and he's still a bit green, Zelfa Barrett, but he got fast hands, fast feet, and if he can just keep that discipline, I think he can box rings round Martinez. I do. He just has to stay focused, because Martinez will always be dangerous, but I think the higher the pace of the fight is, the more Martinez will struggle. I think you got to be wary in the early rounds of those swinging, when he swings that backhand over the top. That right hand over the top, you've got to be wary of that, because it's a hard shot to defend against, and he carries weight with it. So that don't always knock you out, but that's the one that puts you on your heels and puts you in a little bit of a like a rabbit in the headlights, and then he goes to work. But I think the movement of Barrett, I think you'll have fun. I think you'll look great.
He could certainly do. I think I think we need to see a bit of a performance from Zelfa Barrett, in my opinion. I think against Eric Donovan, while, highlight reel knockout, which is ultimately what everybody will always go back to and what you'll see on the promos in the build-up for this fight, he was soundly outboxed for large portions of that fight. I know a fight that we discussed kind of off air before while we were talking about this, the Ronnie Clark fight, once upon a time. Ronnie Clark, similar sort of fighter, similar sort of mould to Kiko Martinez, marauding, coming forward, very tough guy. I would like to see a complete performance from Zelfa Barrett. I wouldn't like to see him very much a different style. Eric Donovan and Kiko Martinez are probably two complete polar opposites, but I'd like to see from the first bell to the last bell, whenever that is, Zelfa Barrett in control. And I think you are absolutely right. It's certainly the type of fight that could make him look $1 million. But if he potentially hasn't learned the lessons from the Ronnie Clark fight, admittedly a couple of years ago now, then it's also a potential banana skin.
It is. And I think he showed some good traits in it, because that was his first real test against a guy who just wouldn't be denied against with Ronnie Clark.
Who, by the way, is a real handful on his night for anybody.
No, it really is. But he showed some good qualities. Like, he got up off the floor, he got hurt and hit a few times. He kept battling on, and he lost. And I had him losing as well. It was still relatively close-ish, but he lost fair and square, I feel. But he got him. But he had that fight. That's the important thing. He's had that fight, that test. He didn't quite come through it, but he knows what it's like when you get hit and you're hurt. And do you fire back, or do you just look to defend? The recklessness sometimes when you don't know what you're going to do. The fight or flight scenario, which is we all have it, but in different situations you react differently, of course. But if you don't know how you're going to react, you'll know now. You have some sort of a memory of how you should conduct yourself. So he's had that test that he didn't know. He half passed it in some ways, but he failed because he got beat. And the Donovan fight was one where he's up against a real skillful guy who can sit on that back foot and make you miss, and also doesn't give you anything to hit, or half gives it to you, but he's out the range all the time. So when you're the guy who works behind the jab well, like Zelfa Barrett does, when a Donovan takes away your jab, you're always going to be having to come from behind, or have to find a little bit extra to come over the line. And so it was a tricky fight for him. That was always a tricky fight. That was never going to be, he was never going to look good in, and potentially lose. To be fair, I think Donovan but it was a great finish. And again, naturally smaller. And I think that's the difference here with Martinez. I think he's going to be significantly smaller. You're going to see it, but I mean, weight-wise as well, strength-wise. I know Martinez is strong. He's a strong super bantamweight who wasn't very tall. Still strong featherweight because he's so strong, but it's super feather. Against a guy who could be easily could be a lightweight, who I thought actually should be a lightweight. I think it's good matchmaking. I think the timing of it all sets up lovely, because then he's beat Kiko Martinez, but not the Kiko Martinez of 5 years ago.
And he's also there, Kiko, because of the style in which he fights, he is always there to be hit early on in the fight. We saw what Scott Quigg did to him, and landed that right uppercut. Admittedly, after I remember at the time, the first round being somewhat torrid for Scott Quigg at the time. I remember he walked him into that right uppercut in the second round, I think it was. It is also the type of fight where, while we could see the bull versus the matador, we could also see Zelfa Barrett catch him or walk him onto something early in the fight when Martinez is marauding and doing his thing.
Well, I think Martinez got to know, if Martinez is going in with real ambition, he's got to go for it off the gate. And take that risk that he's going. That just sounds silly, naive, but at his age, if he really was got ambitions to go on, it's not just taking a payday and trying to win, he's genuinely trying to progress his career again. Then I think he's got to gamble those later rounds where the tank might be empty to make a real impression. Because you get someone like a Barrett who's a smooth operator, get him into a rhythm, especially because he got those physical advantages as well, which would be huge. And also, he's a snappy puncher, Barrett. He's not a huge puncher, but he's a snappy puncher. So someone coming down with their head low with that uppercut, that Barrett uppercut, and then that whipping left hook. It's not quite his Uncle Pat's, but it's good enough.
Yeah, I mean,
it's good enough.
It is still it is a slight homage to Uncle Pat with his left hook. And as we say, I mean, we can say what we want about the Eric Donovan fight. You mentioned yourself there, Eric Donovan, tricky southpaw. I mean, admit another featherweight. Shouldn't have been boxing necessarily at super featherweight, but a tricky night's work for anybody. But ultimately, what we remember from that fight is the savage left hook knockout, which was, I mean, admittedly come off the back of two previous knockdowns. But I mean, it was a one hit quitter when it landed. Another good fight on that card. Leigh Wood, Reece Mould for the vacant British featherweight title. Leigh Wood, I think, well, he was obviously boxing the Golden Contract, and I think a lot of people fancied him in that tournament, particularly after his first round showing. Big fight for him now. Important fight. He's now working under Ben Davison. So that's very interesting. Not two styles that I would have necessarily thought. Leigh Wood very big at the weight.
Well, maybe he's got sometimes you see another fighter. Josh. Once a trainer gets a big fighter, then another fighters follow. That's understandable. And maybe you think he needed more movement to his game or more thought or whatever. Because I think that's what Ben sort of looks like. I don't know yet. Still wait to see. But that's what it looks like. He works on.
Yeah.
But it's a hard fight against Reece Mould. I think they're not similar styles, but they both like to box and they can do a bit of pop. Without being big puncher, they've got a bit of pop in their shots. But I like Leigh Wood, and I like him a lot. I just got a feeling that Reece Mould might just nip him over the line on this one. I think this might be the fight of the night, Because I think they can both potentially enough to hurt each other, but maybe not enough to put each other to sleep. But I think at some point, Wood will try and keep it long, but I think Mould might have the slightly faster hands. And then he'll struggle with that, so he'll try and, though Ben Davison won't want him to, I think he will try and be the aggressor then. And then he might walk onto some shots. I don't think enough to stop him, but enough to get caught and start, not to unravel, but to get a bit. I think he might lose his shape before Mould. That's what I got a feeling. Though saying that, he's been at this sort of levelish before, where Mould hasn't quite been at this sort of level of exposure. That's the thing. This is Wood's a favour because he's had the fights on Sky. So the people see him more, but Mould's gone more under the radar. But I think I got a feeling that he might just come trumps.
I'm interested to see if Ben Davison will actually be working the corner, because he wasn't initially, because Lee McGregor was boxing Karim Gurfi for the European bantamweight title, but that fight has now been moved. So I'm not sure whether or not Ben Davison will actually now be in the corner for Leigh Wood on Fight Night, which I think could be interesting. I mean,
if he's home, he will.
Yeah, because you would think. I mean, I had this conversation completely different, but I had a conversation with Kevin Barry, who trains Umar Salamov, and he'd never had a fight with him, but he trains him because of COVID. He's trained him for like over a year now. And I said, well, what's that like sort of working with a fighter and preparing him to go into a fight? And even when he was preparing him to go into a fight, which didn't actually happen, he was sort of doing like having to tell people what to say in the corner, or doing FaceTime sessions like the week before the fight. And you just think like, surely that's not ideal. So you would think that if there is any way that Ben Davison can be in the corner for the first fight, and being a big fight as well, if Leigh Wood loses this fight at this level, it is kind of difficult to see where he goes next.
Yeah, it's not the end of his career, but it means...
Not the end of his career, sure, but...
He stepped on that level, and he's taking fights then as the opponent rather than the A side,
Yeah, so that is interesting. Interesting bout for the vacant British featherweight title. Right, a couple of young'uns on that card who, causing a few ripples. Let's start with Ivan Price, aka Hopi Price, of course under Dave Caldwell's stewardship. Very tall, slippery, rangy southpaw. You like what you've seen from Hopi Price so far?
I have, yeah. I think you could see some of the stuff that he'd been working on in the last fight. The fight camp was the last.
Yeah, Johnny Phillips, he boxed.
And so he did really well. He's still making a few mistakes. And he gets a little bit tall at times, but most of all, I think he's quite neat and tidy. Physical strength you worry about because he's young, but I think he'll grow into that. But yeah, he looks. You can see the talent. You can see why he's raving about him, because you can see the potential that he has. Some of the moves he does, he looks really slick.
It's interesting you would say that about kind of the physical strength of him and like the maturity, which is you're always going to get with guys who have come straight out of the juniors as amateurs and not boxed at a high level, or even boxed as a senior in the amateurs. But spoke to Dave Caldwell several times about kind of the development of Hopi Price and what he's looking to do with him. Sparring a lot with a certain kid Galahad, which is great work for him at this stage of his career. Obviously, Barry is very much he's knows all of the old tricks of the trade, both good and bad, the dark arts, obviously, which is it's all in the game, so to speak. And he's very much a strong, well built inside fighter. I think that will only aid his development working with somebody like him at that stage of his career.
Well, if you can land more than 2 punches on Galahad, then your accuracy's improved dramatically. Yeah, of course, and learning. Yeah, it's learning trick. You only learn through. Most of the time, people can tell you stuff, but it's through activities, physical activity. That's where you learn. So, like, when someone's twisting you and turning you, You don't got to ask him why. You feel it. You go, I'll try that. Sometimes it's easier to do that than when your trainer stops you and shows you. Because he's sort of showing you, but you're not doing it. So when someone's doing it to you, you feel how effective it can be.
And if you don't do it right, you catch a backhand.
Most definitely. Yeah, you can.
And particularly with Barry, I mean, Mr. Galahad, I think he takes his spars rather seriously, as a lot of fighters do.
Yeah.
I think Mr. Price would have probably had a few forearms and elbows and what have you in there, giving him a little bit of an education into life as a professional fighter.
And he won't use most of these things now, but it's just to learn and also that physical conflict of not the punching part, but just having people lean on you and pull you and push you, and how much energy do you want to waste? Because sort of showing you can push against somebody, but sometimes you just got to go with the flow. Let them, if they push you, let them push you back, and then when you get as soon as your back leg touch the ropes, you take a pivot. You just change it a little bit, so they're pushing, but because they're used to you, there's no resistance for them. So all of a sudden you just turn a little bit, or you step into them and then step back, and it'll break them because you're not pushing with them all the time. They're not showing they're stronger than you. They're just thinking they're pushing you back easy. Then you show some resistance, and that gets you free sometimes.
Which is what I think we saw, the elements of that in his performance against Johnny Phillips, who, of course, he came in slightly heavier than was agreed on the night, and he's very much a man, whereas as Hopi Price...
And game as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that was something that Dave Coldwell said to me, that he was very impressed with when he chose to have a little go or have a stand there and try and push him back, and when he decided to let Johnny Phillips, as you mentioned, push him back and then turn him. So yeah, I think a lot to like about Hopi Price, as I do a certain Dalton Smith. Now, we've heard a lot about Dalton Smith over the years, kind of on the circuit, out of Sheffield, and his kind of talent, really. And he looks like somebody to really be excited about in 2020. I'm really looking forward to seeing his development. Doesn't have an opponent yet, but of course, at the early stage of his career, that's not wildly kind of, it's not out of the ordinary. But lots to like about Dalton Smith out of the Steel City Gym.
Yeah, it's a lovely boxing, lovely composure. I can't remember the punch exactly what he did, but I remember just going, that was beautiful in the fight camp. I think he sort of like, you could see him thinking, and he went through. He went to throw a punch. It might be in a jab and then, or an uppercut. I think he went to throw an uppercut, and then changed his mind halfway through, and could he seen the gap and turned over to a left hook, or if it was the other way, it's even more impressive. You've gone to a left hook and changed to an uppercut. I think that might have been what it was, and it wasn't the punch that finished the fight, but it led to it, And I just thought that's so just to have that process in your brain to move so quickly that actually you've because most of the time you see something. It's almost like a subconsciously you throw that shot, you've thrown it, but you tell yourself to throw it, but you've seen a gap and you've gone for it. You've done that, and then the gap's changed or another gap's appeared, and he's changed it in mid throw. Like
I couldn't. Those fractions of a second.
Well, I couldn't do it. I can't do it. And I don't know. I'm not saying he might not know that he didn't what he was doing, but the fact that he can do it, whether it be subconsciously or not, it's a talent in itself. It just goes to go how technically gifted he is. And his balance is really good. He doesn't rush anything. He's a real talent. When he steps up in, sometimes some kids, you've got to be aware, some kids can look fantastic at a certain level, and then they step up to it, not massively, and all of a sudden you go, oh. Chris Eubank Jr. was literally just looked like the biggest puncher on the planet when he turned pro. I mean, he looked like, if his dad could punch as hard as he could, how good would he have been? It was like that. And then he stepped up the level. He's still an explosive puncher, but they lacked the weight and the power than they had at lower level, when he was just literally putting people to sleep, and like everyone was just like hanging through the ropes at most of his fights. He looked phenomenal. So it can be that sometimes. You have to be wary of that. But for what we've seen of Dalton so far, if he can transfer that going up in the levels, then he's a problem for anyone.
Potentially a little bit small at 140. In this modern age, especially. You look at the size of some of the guys down at 135 pounds.
I know that. Maybe, but you.
Or is it a little bit too early in his career to be thinking about stuff like that?
It depends how he feels out and stuff like that. I know you're on about size and reach and stuff, but look at Canelo.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's a Canelo, but...
Dalton Smith's dog is named Canelo, by the way. Just thought I'd throw that in there, because I know Dalton would want that to be said, but yeah.
That won't help him. but you know what I mean? But if you're used to it, and you can adapt to it, as long as your timing's good, then yeah, well, why not? And he does have exceptionally good timing, and his vision's good, and they're the important. I'd rather have that than size, quite a lot, to be honest. See, size is a curse, and it can be a curse. I mean, because being tall and having long reach and all is great, and being strong sometimes great, but sometimes you don't. When you're a big puncher. So it's great. I lack the punch. I have the worst puncher on the planet. But I mean, being a big puncher is great. You're knocking everyone out. But then you don't, because it disguises your frailties and all the other parts of your games. And most often you don't work on those defaults because you can just punch. You just knock everyone out. Don't matter. I don't have to learn the throw jab. Don't have to do this. Don't have to do that. Yeah, you looked at the guy there, Deontay Wilder. That's it. But it's worked for him. But actually, it took him all the way. So, but what I mean is, at some point in your career, you need to have what Canelo being the most rounded fighter on the planet. You have to have a rounded, experience, and you have to be as rounded as you can, but as many things as you can possibly be, because you'll fall short. Happened to me. I could punch, and ultimately then, when I couldn't punch and I got to a certain level, me being able to punch enough to stop me walking through me worked at a certain level, but the highest level, that don't work. Because to hit hard to stop them walking through you is to potentially knock them out. Otherwise, they still keep walking. That's what it's like at the high level, and you get caught out. You have to have a rounded game. So yeah, so being small might be a disadvantage, but if you get used to it and you can work on it, and you can fill into your weight a bit more, then there's no reason why you can't go all the way.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And that's not me saying that, I think he's too small for 140. I think it's an interesting kind of thing to look at for him. Also saw him spar Luke Campbell a couple of times before Luke Campbell went out and boxed Ryan Garcia, and was very, very impressed with Dalton Smith, as was Shane McGuigan and Luke Campbell, both very complimentary about him. I think there's an awful lot to like about him. He's got his head screwed on well. He's trained by his dad, which for boxing dad trainers, I think Grant Smith is quite. I think he needs to develop some sort of.
He ain't got no gimmick, have he?
No, yeah. What could his gimmick be? Didn't he get hit? He got hit by a lorry, but I'm not sure that's
Did
a
he?
gimmick. Yeah, he's indestructible.
My dad's so bad. He fights lorries. Yeah. Maybe that one.
But yeah, I think maybe that's the only thing that Dalton Smith is missing. His dad needs a gimmick. Outside of that, I think we're pretty much there with him. So yeah, we're very much looking forward to that fight, or that card on Saturday, the 13th of February. Hopefully, we don't have to wait till September for boxing, Barry. Jesus.